Good morning, everyone, and you're all welcome to this June accountability session of the Northern Ireland Policing Board. Deputy Chief Constable, you are in the proverbial hot seat today as the Chief Constable is out of the country, and you are very welcome, as indeed is the rest of your team. We are also pleased to welcome Director General Graham Bigger from the National Crimes Agency for the biannual update report on activity. You're very welcome, Graham. We will begin with questions on the report received from the Office of the Chief Constable and then move to the NCA report. But before that, I'd like to give some opening remarks of my own, and I want to open with the topic of funding. I had the pleasure of attending the recent Police Federation event and the Superintendents Association AGM, and the issue of resourcing remains very much high on the agenda, albeit I think we are all agreed that we are in a better financial starting position this year than we were last year. That said, the recovery business case, which we all committed to and supported, has been approved by the Department of Finance. However, it's been approved without any monies currently forthcoming due to affordability. This is extremely disappointing and presents somewhat of a quandary on police recruitment plans. The board remains fully supportive of the Chief Constable and indeed the need for increasing officer and staff numbers. We need to collectively engage with the Minister and department officials on how this can now be moved forward through an in-year monitoring round. And we do need to raise wider issues, including the need for multi-year budgeting for PSNI, and as well as the inability to carry forward strategic reserves. Following last month's discussion on the management of legacy and associated costs in terms of resources, the board will also be supporting the Chief in his bid to ensure the disproportionate impact that legacy has on the here and now service delivery, and we hope that that will be addressed. Finally, on resourcing and our most valuable resource, our people, can I extend my best wishes to officers injured over the course of the last month. I trust they are getting the organisational support that they require. I will be lending my support to raising awareness to the issue of assaults and attacks on our police officers and the new campaign launched this month as the figures continue to increase. We heard the very disturbing statistics at the recent Federation conference. Over the last 3 years, there have been staggering total of 9,415 assaults, and 2,826 of these have involved injury. On my recent visit to various areas around Northern Ireland, indeed referring to Newry in particular, the officers there spoke of an increase in ramming incidents which causes injury and damage to property. This is all very unacceptable. The board had called for a review of legislation, and it is welcome that the Minister has indicated that this now will be addressed in the soon-to-be introduced sentencing bill. I want to move to the important issue of road safety. Last week, board members had a very informative visit to meet with officers and staff on the road policing unit. We had the benefit of seeing and hearing about the proactive and reactive work of all of the officers in that unit. Road safety and the effectiveness of the PSNI in partnership with others is a new measure in the policing plan. The enforcement and preventative work that we heard about is vitally important in reducing road fatalities and injuries. End of year's figures show that people continue to act recklessly on our roads, so we all must continue to promote responsible driving and pedestrian safety. Crime figures, and this month the annual crime figures show that there were 8,233 fewer crimes, including violent offences, robbery, criminal damage and harassment when compared to the previous 12 months. The board obviously condemned the fact that sexual offences and hate crime incidents have increased and continue to do so. This remains of concern, and we will be discussing these figures in detail at our committees. Finally, as a board, we wish to send our thoughts to all of those affected in the terrible incident in Liverpool and to all of the first responders who worked so diligently in the hours and days after that incident. If I can now hand over to you, Deputy Chief Constable, for some brief opening remarks on the report submitted, and then we'll move to questions.
Well, good morning, board members, chair, and to those who are joining us online. We're really pleased to once again have been able to present you with a report which I think really does showcase the remarkable breadth of policing activity being delivered by our outstanding men and women. In terms of the key headlines from the report, members will have seen that it was officially confirmed that last year Northern Ireland experienced around 8,000 fewer crimes, and that was a reduction of just under 8%. During the same period, antisocial behaviour reports also fell to the lowest level since records began. And this means, Chair, that Northern Ireland continues to statistically be one of the safest places to live, work and raise a family in these islands. And that is absolutely something that we should be proud of. But sadly, these figures could, and it has to be said, have been used in the past as a basis for challenging the necessity of our recovery business case. But as this board knows, and as Graham will very much appreciate as well, and I think will draw out in his remarks today, behind the headline figures, the work of our officers and staff is becoming increasingly complex and, importantly, resource intensive. That, combined with our decline in police numbers, means that our officers and staff are under increasingly intolerable and unmanageable pressure and stress, a reality that you'll know is already borne out in our service delivery, and that's been recognised by independent scrutiny by HMIC and SIGIMI, but it's also being borne out in our absence and ill health retirement data. Chair, the continued contribution of our officers and staff to these reductions in these increasingly challenging circumstances really shouldn't be underestimated, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. But sadly, we feel that it is. And I suppose in one sense, people not being worried or concerned about their safety and security is possibly the highest compliment that can be paid to us as police. But it definitely does, we feel, contribute to the critical arguments for police funding just not resonating or reaching the political decision makers in the way that they should. And I think it can absolutely be argued that in this respect, we could be seen as being the victims of our own success. With regard to the forthcoming in-year monitoring rounds and our funding gap of £21 million, which includes the commitment to the recovery business case, we need to make sure that we retain a focus on improving our financial position. You're aware that the Chief Constable has written to ministers and party leaders, again underlining and stressing the urgency of our situation. The ask, we feel, in our recovery business plan, and as members will be aware, has been determined as being value for money, and we believe it's capable of restoring the PSNI to a minimum safe operating level for a relatively modest investment. We can't be any clearer on this. We need to secure these additional resources to protect our communities and the men and women who put themselves in harm's way to keep them safe. Without this investment, lives will undoubtedly be changed irreparably and potentially even lost in circumstances where this was preventable. Surely, avoiding that outcome is value for money by anyone's measure. We're grateful and we want to put on record our appreciation to the board and the Justice Minister for their continued support and advocacy, and we would strongly urge other party leaders, ministers and MLAs to prioritise support for policing in the upcoming monitoring rounds. The tragic death of Garda Kevin Flatley in County Dublin last month, I think, was a sobering reminder to us all about the risks that police officers take day in, day out for their communities. And I had the privilege of representing the PSNI at Kevin's funeral, and I know that you'll join me in sending all of our thoughts again to his loved ones and his colleagues. Here too, in recent weeks, we've again seen serious assaults, vehicle rammings and other threats to our officers as they continue to literally place themselves in harm's way to protect the public. This was perhaps most dramatically evidenced on Sunday the 18th of May, when armed response unit officers had to discharge firearms in a 2-hour standoff with an individual clearly in significant distress who pointed a firearm at them in High Street in Bangor. Having reviewed the circumstances surrounding the discharge of the police firearms, the police ombudsmen have confirmed that they are now not opening an investigation. So I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the officers who I think demonstrated exceptional professionalism, courage, resilience and restraint. A 45-year-old male was subsequently charged with possession of a firearm and with intent to cause fear of violence and assault on police. You've mentioned that, Chair, assaults on our officers are a daily reality for them, but they should never be seen as part of the job or indeed tolerable. Not only do they have a huge impact on the officers and their families, but they also directly impact the service that we provide to the public by removing officers from our front line. And you've alluded to the Federation's forthcoming campaign, and that impact will be the key message of the campaign, which is entitled Let Them Protect, and we'll see that launched later this month. Underlining the unique circumstances which we continue to face in our still divided post-conflict society, we continue to have to confront acts of intimidation and division in the form of displays of paramilitary and racist materials. We continue to take robust, proportionate and lawful action, working closely with communities, partners and elected representatives to remove offensive material and, importantly, to hold those responsible to account. Now, next week I'll be meeting again with the Minister for Infrastructure to discuss how we can further improve our joint working in this area, which of course will be particularly relevant as we move into the summer. In recent months as well, Chair, public attention was also drawn to the very serious allegations of sectarianism within the police service made by a retired police officer. Sean's claims understandably caused great public concern. The type of behaviour that was alleged was, as I said at the time, absolutely disgraceful and not reflective of our culture. The claims caused great distress too to many in the organisation, but in particular those who were closest to the claims and the officer himself. And since the last board meeting, Sean has of course now unequivocally retracted his allegations. He's acknowledged that they were unfounded and he's expressed deep regret for the distress that's been caused. I'm relieved that Sean has done this, and I think, to be honest, it's the best possible outcome for everybody, including Sean himself. I want to place on record my own, as well as the Chief Constable's appreciation for the professionalism, the integrity and the dignity that was displayed by both Sean Servin and his retired colleagues from the O12, or the Black TSG as they're known, throughout this entire incident. We're also really grateful to them for their continued contact and support to Sean, and Sean has now asked for privacy, and we would ask today that that's respected. I want to take the opportunity, however, to reassure the board that we're in no way complacent or defensive about the potential for wrongdoing or poor behaviour within our workplace. As we've told you previously, in line with our commitments to be workforce focused under the policing plan, we are actively developing a deep dive survey that will allow us to better evidence culture within the organisation and hopefully provide you and the public with reassurance. In the last 2 months as well, the Chief Constable has personally convened 4 fast-tracked special case misconduct hearings. 3 of these hearings were in respect of inappropriate material in private WhatsApp groups discovered as part of a police ombudsman investigation, and a further hearing related to substance misuse. All 4 officers were dismissed by the Chief Constable. A strong demonstration, I feel, that we remain absolutely committed to maintaining the highest standards in policing and speeding up misconduct processes. Looking ahead this month, Chair, we'll see the commencement of our peak period for parades, bonfires and events. And again, to reassure the board, engagement has been ongoing with event and parade organisers for many months now. And we also continue to work very closely with our statutory partners and landowners on the cross-executive bonfire management group. I'm pleased to report that the current outlook for the summer is firmly in the space of preparing for public safety and not public order. We will, however, make sure that we are prepared for all eventualities. In addition to our usual busy summer period, this year, of course, we have the added benefit of the 153rd Open Championship, which will take place in Royal Portrush in July. Events of this scale showcase the very best of Northern Ireland, and policing will play a critical part in making sure that the event is possible. From public safety to traffic management to community reassurance and counter-terrorism readiness, the PSNI will be at the centre of delivering a safe, secure and successful tournament. And we've even got our fingers crossed that we might have to make provision for a local homecoming victory parade as well, but we'll not get too far ahead of ourselves. Chair, policing has this month, as always, been the subject of much discussion and debate, but conscious that members have notified a number of questions for us, I'll just leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. And you raised the very sad death of Garda Kevin Flatley. This board also shares that sorrow and sense of condolence. I have written to the Commissioner in the Garda Síochána to that regard. And in relation to the business recovery plan, we do stand beside you in ensuring that we can do as much as we can to advocate for resources for that plan. I'm now going to open for questions, and the first one is from Peter Osborne on an application to join the PSNI.
Thanks, Chair. Deputy Chief Constable, thank you for the introduction, and can I say thanks also for the information and data supplied about recruitment by council area. As you know, and we all know, it's really important that the PSNI is representative and that you can see yourself in a way looking back at you when you're engaging with the police. And that includes, I think, hearing yourself in terms of local accents and so on. Given the imbalance there is in some council areas in terms of recruitment and serving police officers, can you say anything more about that, but also outline in future recruitment campaigns by the PSNI what the PSNI can and will do to address some of that imbalance? And even as important as that, what do you think other agencies and organisations can do to help with that, redressing that imbalance?
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to pick this one up for you. So thank you for your comments. And I think in the analysis that we provided through to you, I think two things. First one is it's good to see that actually all the council areas had a representative application coming into the recruitment process. But most importantly, you're right, we looked at that from a working age population, so really who would be eligible to apply from each of the council areas. And I think for me, there were 4 particular areas that we have been closing the gap, if I call it that. So when you look at the areas for me were around Urymore and Down, Derry City and Strabane and Mid-Ulster. So vis-a-vis, even comparing it to our extant workforce of people that we've got working in the organisation compared to the working age population, we have managed to narrow that gap, i.e. we're getting a greater percentage of people applying from those areas than we've got currently working in the organisation. And most notably, the one we've reduced that the other way, and that Belfast is getting lower than having a particularly high number. Ards and North Down, Lisburn and Castlereagh, they're both 8% of the working age population. Currently, those figures for us are 21% and 14%, and we significantly reduced that gap in closing that down in this recruitment campaign. So I do think over the last couple of campaigns, but particularly 2025, in the run into it, we did a significant amount of outreach. So we did that through the Here For You, which is our engagement strategy. Taking that forward, we looked at our outreach into our districts, working through schools, further education colleges, the retail sector and community groups, and indeed working with our advertising partners. We looked at the range of mediums around how to access different people. So whether that was digital, specialist press, some of the social media and how to get that across, some of the audio and indeed the radio. And that has been clear to us that we've been reaching groups in a different way. You mentioned about other agencies. Absolutely happy to be looking at what more we can do and working with the board and coming up with those. But we did engage through our PCSP managers and indeed employment advisors from the jobs and benefits offices as well, right down into business sectors, faith leaders, faith agencies and so forth. So there's always more to do. We always look to close that gap, absolutely. But I think the 2025 campaign showed that these are starting to have an impact. And with the exception of in 2026, the recruitment campaign will look and feel in that fixed, rigid way. We will have a date, we will go out, we will close it. But when the contract comes up for renewal after that, we are developing a specification where we would have a rolling programme. So as we draw down off the campaigns, we will be able to look at this in a much more timely way, just not 1 year or 2 years at a time, but every quarter we could look at it and see, is that making an impact? Are we having the impact in the representation? And always work to look at how we can flex and tweak that. So I think we're pleased that we've made a level of progress with regards to the geographical representation in this campaign. But absolutely happy to engage with the board and yourselves in any thoughts around how we can continue to progress that and improve it further.
Did you want to come in on this, Deputy Chief Constable?
Yeah, sure. Probably just a couple of things to add. Yeah, I think it will continue to be a continuous effort. The Here For You strategy will continue specifically in terms of the engagement outreach. And again, it does kind of cycle back as well to the recovery business case, because one of the key elements in terms of that engagement outreach is going to be the number of neighbourhood and frontline officers that we have to be able to engage in that activity. So we hope to be able to enhance that just in time for the campaign to become a continuous kind of rolling effort. But to pick up your point as well, specifically about working with other agencies, we've actually found that in particular joint recruitment events with other blue light services are a great way of kind of creating a safer space for people to be able to come in and explore and discuss with us a future in policing. So we've certainly used that in the Northwest, and it's a model that we seek to roll out across the other areas where we have limited recruitment at this particular time.
Just a brief comment, Chair. I think it's in everyone's interest to have a good local representative policing service, no matter what your background. So I would again urge any organisation, whether it's community or other organisation in those council areas that are underrepresented at the minute, to work with the police in the next recruitment campaign. And that includes things like the police and community safety partnerships and others, because clearly there is something there that still needs addressed in those geographic locations.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back in?
No, I agree, and in particular for those that have concerns about policing, you know, there's that old saying, you can't row a boat from the shore. So, you know, if you want to make change, come along, get involved.
Thank you. Next question is from Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. Very welcome today, Bobby, in the hot seat. Note your comments are shorter than the Chief, so that's very welcome. Because it always gives more time for questions. The OPONI report that, in terms of the young lady who was taken out of the shop in Lisburn, and that report's out this week, it does slightly conflict with what the Chief told us previously, and I do believe it's unclear. He made comment at that time that the police were working in conjunction with a family member, and I don't believe that that's clear from the report. So I suppose my question to you is, are you going to challenge that to actually get that factually correct? Because I presume it is correct. Because it does give a suspicion that there is a difference of opinion between the Ombudsman and what the Chief Constable said at that time. And then, I'll roll my other question into this one.
Go ahead.
The other question wasn't, you noted, the Chair noted our visit to Sprucefield, and I joined that as well, even though it was a partnership committee, and I have to say it was excellent. Congratulations to everyone who made us feel very welcome at the time, but obviously there was concerns raised at the time as well when we were there. One of those, we listen, we act, and we care, I think, and I touched this at Resources Committee. Some of the guys and girls within the Interceptor team believe they're not listened to or acted upon in terms of their requests or their needs to do their job in an appropriate way in terms of equipment, and I mean cars. They believe some of the cars that they have is not suitable for what they're being asked to do, and I would like to hear your thoughts on that and how we could address those, because I think it's important that we do listen and we do act in terms of the concerns of individuals. And then we actually went to the collision investigation unit there, which I have to say was stark for me for the first time to see that and what those guys and girls is doing in that department. But I have to say, given the experience that we've all learned here of some of the police officers who experienced some very harrowing scenes, these people are witnessing this day and daily. And it struck me that there doesn't seem to be enough provision to either give them support as the first thing, or actually allow them to move. So, I spoke to one person in there for 5 years, and on average, as we all know, unfortunately, road deaths are sitting between 60 and 70 a year, and that's all these individuals are seeing. So I'm asking, before it becomes a crisis within policing, what is the police going to do to address this? These people are subject to this on a daily basis. I think it's unfair. I think more needs to be done, and I think there need to be opportunities to actually progress within their career within policing and allowed to move out of that area and actually move others around who are suited to that. So that's a couple of questions.
Thank you. All three different subjects, so I'll let you handle them in the best way you.
Yeah, so we'll spread the load here around the team. So on the CEX piece, maybe just clarification. So are you basing that, Trevor, in terms of the PONI statement that was released yesterday and the media report? Would that be right? Well, I'll bring Ryan in to speak on that shortly, but certainly in the more detailed PONI report and the recommendations that have come across to us, I did see an acknowledgement that the father of the young girl had been involved in working with police in terms of the removal, but I'll check with Ryan here just to make sure that's exactly right. So I'll ask Ryan to deal with CEX on the roads piece, probably a combination of Mark McNaughton and Mel to talk to that in terms of the kind of fleet provision and the suitability of that, and then I'll ask Mel to comment on CIU, and maybe if Claire wants to contribute to that as well in terms of the kind of welfare offer. But first of all, then over to Ryan for CEX.
Thanks, Bobby. And thanks, Trevor. So firstly, just to say that I welcome the conclusion of the Ombudsman's investigation and the publication of the report into it. It clearly was a very difficult and complex set of circumstances. We talked about it at the time, and distressing for all involved, not least the young woman at the heart of it, who has been my main concern in all this and priority. The report does very accurately reflect the fact that the officers dealt very patiently in an attempt to diffuse a difficult situation and worked with the family and deferred to the family in doing that. So it does acknowledge that, and they do say that they behaved appropriately in doing that. There was no misconduct found, and indeed, as I said very publicly at the time, the officers worked compassionately and humanely to try and deal with a very difficult situation. The report has identified that in the training frontline officers get, not reflecting on how the officers behaved in this occasion, but there's no specific training on dealing with non-verbal, those with non-verbal autism, and we're happy to consider how we might feature that in future training for officers should they come across similar circumstances again. So just I can confirm for your reassurance, OPONI did reflect the fact the officers did work with the family to help to diffuse that difficult situation.
Can I just say that's helpful, because I mean I think this is the suggestion otherwise has been left out there in terms of the media, and sometimes the media can be irresponsible in terms of how they report stuff as well, but I think that's good in terms of clarification, and it certainly gives us as a board a reassurance, and I'm satisfied with that reassurance as well.
Okay, then we'll hand over to Mel for roads.
Yeah, I'll cover the skills and the postings issue first. So most of the officers who were posted into Collision Investigation Unit are accredited detectives, and it's really important that we have those detective skills within that unit because of the complex, sensitive and difficult and protracted investigations they do, particularly around fatal road traffic collisions. Historically, there's been a position in the service that it's very difficult for officers to be able to transfer between different detective disciplines that don't sit within the main crime arena. So obviously Collision Investigation Unit sits in ops support, and we've recognised that, and Claire and I are currently working together to revise that so that people who have got an accreditation can move between disciplines more easily, which would then allow us to help to retain the skills but make sure that we understand and reduce the trauma and allow people lateral development. And that lateral development, I think, is particularly important as we've had a shrinking workforce where there's less opportunity for promotion, but many people want to laterally develop and go into other areas of the business. So that's something we're at a fairly advanced stages of developing into it being something that will feature so that officers can transfer quite simply between cybercrime, Collision Investigation Unit, mainstream detectives. In terms of the fleet and the vehicles, fleet services do liaise really closely with my ops support team, particularly around specialist capabilities, as to what the nature of the fleet needs to look like, what the spec of it is, what sort of vehicles we buy. And there are sometimes some difficult conversations because what officers really like to be driving around in, sometimes it's not that practical. It's not practical from a cost point of view, from a maintenance point of view. One of the main sticking points that we do get actually is around marked and unmarked fleet. So many of them would prefer to drive around in unmarked fleet. But I don't think that represents where we are as a service now. We need visible policing, particularly around that deterrence in the roads that the chair spoke about when he opened up, that the visible deterrence of the marked police vehicles driving around is as important as the enforcement and can often prevent. So there is a blend to be had. We do listen to the feedback we get. We do put all of these things through Protective Measures Committee to make sure we make the best possible decisions. But I will go back to Collision Investigation and the Interceptor team and just explore further what there is with board members and see whether or not we take that any further.
Can I just come back? I mean, and I wouldn't want the suggestion to think, because I mean, the public already have a perception that they get nice cars within that unit. Actually, the conversation I had is they don't want necessarily these particularly large cars. They're actually very satisfied with smaller cars, because what they're saying to us, and I'm sure it's to other members that day, the larger cars don't suit some of the pursuits they're involved in because they're too bouncy. So whenever they're at high speed, they become more dangerous in terms of that vehicle. So actually their preference is something less than what they've actually received. And yes, there was clearly a suggestion in terms of the marked versus unmarked, and I can understand there's two sides to that, but I can understand from their perception where they're actually, particularly intelligence-led operations, that the covert nature of the unmarked car would probably make the job much easier for them as well. But I can understand the perception of roads policing too.
Yeah, and just around the issue around the smaller cars, again, it's the balance, because we want them to be able to respond and bring their skills to fatal road traffic collisions, to be able to do what they need to do at those things too, where they're needed. So having a car that's big enough to carry the equipment is also an important feature. So it's just about striking the balance, and usually the blended fleet is where we need to be with these things.
Just to add, and Neil referred to it, so I do chair a transport delivery group, which effectively is a user forum. So there are representatives from across the service, and that includes roads policing. So that's really the forum when we can take this forward. And I think just to give a commitment along with Mel to speak to the particular business unit, but we'll look at that as part of the user requirement to make sure that the operational fleet continues to be fit for purpose and that officers have, the type of vehicles that they need. So we'll definitely look into that and come back through the Resources Committee. Trevor.
Okay, thank you. And just to reiterate, it's actually reassuring that there is work going on to support officers. People who are investigating fatal accidents are seeing things that we as human beings aren't built to see. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to Nuala, a question on North Belfast.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much. I want to ask a question just around the attacks that took place just over 2 weeks ago now on a number of homes in North Belfast, the Laurel Park area. A number of us political representatives have met with these families over the past 2 weeks and sat with them, and they've been understandably very upset and scared as well. I just want to ask where we currently are with regards to the police in response to those incidences. We'd like to think that, it's 2025, this long after the Good Friday Agreement, that actually we could have families living in shared neighbourhoods welcomed by all, and the majority of people do welcome, but that there is a minority of people now that are frightening others for the aim to get them to move out of their area, and it's not acceptable. So I want to hear what the police in response update is from now, and also any neighbourhood impact that it has, because as you've just said in your previous answer, it's the marked cars, it's the officers on the ground that actually give the confidence in communities. But so too the communication between those officers, knowing why they're there, the people that they need to talk to and protect as well. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Thanks, Noel. I know you've been working very closely along with a number of other political representatives with Paddy Mullen, the local area commander. So Ryan can give us the update. There have been some, I think, positive developments in respect to this as well.
Thanks, Neil, very much for the question. I'm really grateful for it because it gives me the chance to very publicly condemn that hate-filled, abhorrent behaviour that we all saw on the 21st of May. That night or that day we saw attacks on houses, windows broken, clearly a sectarian attempt to intimidate people out of their homes. That has no place in our society and should not be tolerated, and we will bring all of our investigative powers to bring people to justice should they be involved in behaviour like that. We have investigated, and this week, just in the past days, we have arrested and charged a male in relation to the damage caused to one of those properties, which I hope gives some reassurance to those families involved. As you say, we know absolutely that the families are feeling disturbed, they're scared, and that engagement is really important to show them support. So we have had high visibility patrolling within the area. We have been able to refer families through to hate crime advocacy support services, and that support will continue. I just want to probably echo the words of Chief Inspector Paddy Mullen, who works locally there, who called out that sort of hate-fueled thuggery and that attempt to intimidate people out of their homes at the very early stage of this investigation. I think it's really important that we are heard to say that very, very publicly. I thought it might be useful. There has been speculation, I'm sure colleagues will have seen it both in the media and locally, about paramilitary coordination or paramilitary efforts that were behind these attacks. So, Chair, with your permission, I thought it might be useful to bring in my colleague ACC Beck to give maybe a flavour of that, to give you some insight into that as well. Nuala, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's fair to say that there are significant tensions in the area, primarily around the issue around housing. What we are picking up in terms of local information, and there's been some conflicting reporting, I think it's fair to say. Some of that reporting would indicate that persons linked to paramilitary groups have been involved in the activity. However, other reports indicate that the attacks have stemmed from a much more community level rather than an organisation. So there is some conflicting, and that's similar to what we saw around August last year in the disorder as well. So we will continue to monitor that situation. We will continue to support the investigation with both intelligence and support from detectives as well as may be necessary, and be absolutely clear in terms of we will address that behaviour and offender criminal behaviour wherever that comes from or whatever form that takes.
And just finally to say, thank you to the community for their engagement and for political representatives and others. Statutory agencies have helped to support that, and we'll continue to support those families as we can in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you for the answer. I know that someone has a supplementary question, but just with regards to the conflicting reporting, I think it's really important, though, with these issues, and obviously I will not have all of the information, and it's important that people do come to the police with information that they may have that they think is relevant. However, it's also just really difficult for people to often raise their heads above the parapet if they have information, and we do know that it is also really difficult, and it's been proven, to actually charge and successfully have an outcome of those who are linked and to paramilitary activity. And it's one of those things that the dogs in the street know they're linked to it, but yet we're not actually seeing those criminal justice outcomes. So whilst it might be conflicting reporting, I think it's also important just that ears to the ground in actually gathering that information and allow it to come forward, and actually ultimately keep testing it in court, because it needs to be. But these families want to be able to come home. Some of them, I know, no, probably not, that's up to them, but at what stage, and can we tell them regarding risk assessments that your home is now there? We want North Belfast to be a mixed place. It is a vibrant community, but it's about ensuring that they can actually just be safe. I know Gerry.
Gerry? Well, Neil has covered most of it, but I just want to take some of the stuff out. I mean, John Finucane, I want to welcome the fact that there was a multi-agency approach. Commending John Finucane organised the meeting, and 35 people turned up. That included the residents and that. And just to say this, because you are talking to people now if they're watching this, so it's more for the residents than anybody else. And I've been in a number of situations like this, but I have to say it was hugely emotional. I spoke to one of the women after it, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but you wouldn't know who it was, but she cried for 20 minutes. This was her shift from a bad housing situation into a dream, and now she doesn't know what's going to happen. I just wanted to catch in this paramilitary stuff. You see, information was given at the time, and I'm not going to repeat it, but I know the police have it, that there was actually a paramilitary person involved in it. I found it actually quite hard to begin to accept that when a number of houses like this are done, when it's coordinated, when there was a number of people in masks standing around for something like 2 hours before it, and all this information was given to us and given to the police, that at this stage, it's nearly, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but it seems like an avoidance of saying there was paramilitary involvement here. To say that there is tension around housing doesn't say it. I'm just saying it doesn't say it. This is sectarianism. It is people trying to get housing and refusing it on the basis of the religion. And there may have been other personal stuff in it, which was part of that as well. But the personal stuff came from UDA man. and there was a name given, and I don't know, I'm not going to ask you if this is the person who's arrested, but he was named, and what part of the discussion at the thing was, look, we've given names, nobody has gone to their house, nobody has taken any action, and all of that, and what people want is an action in terms of that. And I mean, I'm accepting the times it's hard, this is an ongoing investigation, but there seems to be a reluctance in these things, not just this, if it's paramilitary, let's not say it's paramilitary. And I don't know what the fear is, but I mean, I'm certain, and everybody in that area is certain, that there's paramilitary. If it had been one house, it could have been a neighbour, it could have been all of that there, but when you do a number of houses, when there's people in masks, right, who are there for a substantial period before it was done, so they were getting organised to do it, then it's organised. And I think you should take that on, and that's something that people need to know, that you are not, I'm not making the accusation, by the way, I'm just pointing this out, that the police are not trying to avoid saying what this is really about, because they want to know if they're safe going back in there, if there's an organisation who's going to attack them again, and all of that. So it was, maybe if you could comment a bit on that. And as I say, the information I understand, well, I know actually, because the police were there, and it was a very difficult meeting, I have to say. But and I would welcome the fact that everybody turned up, including the police, to take on that, even though it was very angry residents there, and that's the thing always to do. But could you maybe give some, I don't know if it's an explanation or what way did that work? And I know this is not the dogs in the street, and I know people use that term all the time. It's not the dogs in the street, this is people saying, naming names, and they are angry. They were angry then, this is a few days later, that no action had been taken even to question them, to do anything like that. That's what worries them.
Okay, and I think it's important that we don't get into specific names or individuals, etc. But Ryan has outlined that an investigation is ongoing, that investigation has led to an arrest. I'm not going to comment any wider in terms of that, because that will be something that will be before the courts. Just to be absolutely clear, I am clear where there's information, I am happy to share that as best available. But it needs to be appropriate to the circumstances around that, and this would not be the forum to go into specific information that was passed and what action was taken around that. I think that's something we can pick up sort of private from these proceedings. But just to be absolutely clear, we are committed to addressing criminality wherever that comes from. And I think that's evidenced within the accountability report that is before the board in terms of the activity undertaken in terms of paramilitary activity right across Northern Ireland, but specifically in the Belfast area, and we will continue to do that. From a factual basis, I've indicated what information we have at this minute in time, and there are conflicts around that. But that does include, as I said, that there are indications that persons were involved that were linked to terrorist and paramilitary organisations as well. So that's where we stand. That's the factual position in terms of where we are at the minute. To Nuala's point around information, again, I absolutely accept that there are difficulties in terms of people coming forward and giving that information. It's important that we are in the area providing that reassurance to the community, and certainly that is where we are at this minute in time. And through that visibility and confidence building, then that perhaps encourages people to provide information and gives confidence for people to provide information. But beyond that, there is also confidential telephone number that, again, people can pass information to us. And where we have that information, we will assess that information and we will act on that information.
I absolutely understand you can't give me specific information, but by the paramilitaries involved in that is important, and it's not a specific. Right? It's important because these people are trying to make up their mind, and there is a difference. Some of them who want to stay, and some of them who are saying we're not going to go back. And this is people who have moved into a new house. This is their dream. So from their point of view, they're having to give this up. And one of the things that they will decide in that is if this is paramilitary, then it's a bigger threat. That's the issue. and they do not feel safe. If you have a difference with the neighbour, no matter how valid it might be, at least you have, because it's a single issue, you go to the police can do something about it. And the worry there is that's it. I just finished with the last wee point, just to make this point. There was a number given out during the meeting that people could contact. There was a discussion around the police presence and all of that there, and I was phoned again, or my office was phoned again the day after it, saying that they had phoned the number a number of times because we're very worried about things that happened and they weren't getting an answer. I think it was a mobile number, if I remember correctly. But if you could look into that, because that then becomes, sometimes it's an assurance. But answering the phone when you said, here's the phone at any time, is an important point. I don't expect you to know the answer to that now. I think I need to point that out to him.
Well, what I can add is that yes, there was a phone number given. As I understand, that was the phone number for the duty inspector to give that direct conduit and to, again, increase that confidence around if people had particular issues that they could contact someone who was in position to understand the issues and direct an appropriate police response to that. But that's certainly something that Ryan will pick up on in terms of local policing.
Thank you.
Nuala, did you want to come in very quickly?
Yeah, just quickly, and I know we've spent a lot of time on it. It's the first time publicly to be able to actually speak about it, and given it is something that's akin to what happened before the Troubles, long before my lifetime, it's just madness that it's still happening today. And it's not really for the police, but if those families do choose to either leave or come back, I mean, we cannot let thugs like this win. We need to have the proper policing response, but also other agencies. I think it is important to also say that other agencies as well, and honestly believe that the houses should not be allocated to someone from a preferred neighbourhood, that they should not be allocated at all. And I know we have a housing shortage, but it's the only way that these people can win. But that's not on the police, it's on other agencies, and I think it's important that we all work together on it.
Thank you. And it's important that the victims of all of these crimes or activities are given reassurance and support from the PSNI. I'm going to move to a question from Mark H. Durkan on a recent arrest.
Thanks, Chair. Deputy Chief Constable, there's been considerable public concern, anger even, at the arrest of two people involved in a peaceful anti-genocide campaign in Belfast on the 24th of May. Those are concerns shared by my party and by others. Can you give your analysis of that incident and assessment of the police response to it?
Mark, I'm going to be limited in terms of what I'm able to say, because from conversations that I had with the Police Ombudsman's office yesterday, I understand that they are going to call themselves in on that particular incident, given the public interest that there's been in it. I'm going to ask Ryan to comment as well on it, but I will say this. I mean, we absolutely understand the depth of feeling that people have around the urgency of the situation in the Middle East and how passionately they feel about it. There's hardly a day that goes past without a demonstration or a protest of some shape or form happening in Belfast, or in fact Derry, Londonderry. And conservatively, I'd say over the last 20 months, we've facilitated many hundreds of pro-Palestinian protests under Operation Tarlac, as it's known to us. Helpfully, the vast majority of those have been entirely peaceful and lawful, and we've enjoyed really good engagement with event organisers. There have been a handful of incidents where unfortunately it's become necessary for us to investigate different forms of criminal conduct, damage to property, sometimes assaults on police or security staff and the like. And one of the big issues that has contributed to, let's say, difficult encounters between police and protesters is when they fail to engage with the police. We absolutely stand for and work very hard to uphold the right to freedom of speech and assembly. We recognise them as being fundamental human rights. And we pride ourselves, as an organisation now 23 years old, of having a golden thread that runs through everything we do in terms of human rights. So we will continue to do the best job we can in terms of ensuring that people can enjoy those rights. But of course, they always have to be balanced with the rights of others as well. And that's really where, at times, the rub can come. But I'll ask Ryan if he wants to say anything further, and we previously commented on.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby, and thanks very much, Mark, for the question. As Bobby says, I suppose I'm limited to an extent what I can say because of the Ombudsman investigation, but I don't want to be seen to be trying to avoid the question either. I think it's important for you and for the public to do build on what I'd said previously. Members will have seen that in the aftermath of the incident, I did speak out publicly following what was really quite significant social media criticism and media commentary on police actions. I felt it was appropriate to speak at that time for two reasons. Firstly, around public confidence and reassurance in the police. I think the public would have expected me as a senior officer to look at what had happened, given the criticism, take a view on that, and if it was inappropriate, deal with it, or likewise to be able to provide some reassurance to the public around that. I think that was probably what was expected of me, and likewise for the officers involved who were then subject to sort of criticism and critique of their actions on social media. I also felt important to take a view on that, and if I was satisfied with what I saw, I'll be able to say that publicly as well. Officers have a tough job to deal with imperfect information in a very dynamic situation. So I thought it was important for the public just to kind of hear my initial assessment of that. I, of course, had the luxury, I suppose, of seeing the body-worn video at the time. And I was satisfied, as I said, around the courtesy and professionalism with which the officers dealt with those that were protesting. And I don't think that's disputed. I've heard other commentators say the same. I just want to reassure you that those that were arrested, the two that were arrested, had access to all the protections of the law that are given under the under PACE in terms of the review of their arrest initially, and also access to legal advice. As I say, I had the benefit of seeing things a little more in the round than those who maybe saw it on social media. I really welcome the Ombudsman's investigation into it, and indeed if they find there's organisational learning within that, of course, we'll respond to that and incorporate in our practice into the future. I think also important to note that arrest in and of itself is just an investigative step. It is not a sanction, a determination or an endpoint in of as itself, and that the Public Prosecution Service will consider the evidence provided and make a decision whether it's in the public interest to take forward a prosecution.
Thank you. Bobby, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. I mean, I suppose this could be similar in some ways, or could be viewed as being similar to the CEX incident, in that people won't obviously have seen everything that has happened. So maybe it's appropriate to urge people not to rush to judgment on it. We'll see what PONI have to say about the incident, and I can assure you if there are any lessons that need to be learned in respect of it, we'll certainly adopt those and we won't be shying away from them. I think it is important to keep this and view it in the context of those many hundreds of protests that have taken place without any form of incident. We do regularly promote our advice to people in terms of how best to engage in protest and keep themselves right. I think maybe just off the back of today, we'll reissue that on our social media feeds so as people have that.
Thank you for that. Nuala, you want to come in on this again?
I think Mark was on that. Sorry, Chair, just to come in with supplementary, and I appreciate the answer and the limits that are on the answers that you can give, given that the Police Ombudsman is now looking at it. And I'm not going to ask you any further that might compromise that investigation. With all due respect, the courtesy of the constables isn't the issue here, or hasn't been what is in question, but certainly the perception is that the arrest and detention of these two women appears disproportionate, and what the Ombudsman might be asking, or hope is what was there no non-arrest intervention? Was the incident over-policed? Because the community are, I think rightly or understandably, confused at the scale, or apparent scale, of the operation, given, I suppose, the lack of resources that is often cited as an explanation for a perceived and often real unsatisfactory response to community concerns raised, and then that there's questions asked as to whether there's a different response to commercial concerns than community concerns as they're raised.
Okay. And Gerry, you want to come in on this?
Okay. Well, it is the Ombudsman, so I'm going to try and avoid getting into that arena. However, I need to make some context. You said it's in context of many protests. So I'll just give an opinion. In the context of many protests, this was fairly low-key. A couple of women, I know Sue Pantel, according to her evidence on TV, I'm actually arrived 11 minutes late. She had nothing to do with the sticker going on the thing. A sticker on an ATM, as I understand it. Whoever the bank, someone in the bank came out and had already taken it off. So the criminal damage looks a wee bit iffy there too, right?
I think we're getting into the actual details of the case here.
Well, the Ombudsman's going to make up her decision, and she isn't going to make it up on the basis of what I'm saying here. I'm trying to.
There's also a court case.
Well, let the chair handle it, Trevor. Let the chair handle it. Okay.
Well, let's keep it brief.
Okay.
There is an investigation.
Okay, and let me make these points, because it isn't proportionality. And this was a couple of women, one who's a pensioner. She was arrested. And in fairness, it was yourself, Bobby, who said that it's in the context of many protests. And actually, it was in the context of many protests. But the other way to look at that is if you compare that. I mean, what happened there was next week, there was hundreds at it. I was at it. And Sue Pantel was there. And there was a number of police officers there. And I was at the ATMs. And it's because it is an emotional issue. Despite that, there's no difficulty, you know. So the proportionality I'm talking about is, you know, was it? And the Ombudsman would have said this, but was it? And I think yourself came out, ran and said that, and you said here again that it was everything was done properly and all of that. I just want to ask the question when this comes down. You see. This goes to the Public Prosecution Service. Is that in every instance that the police decide it goes to the Public Prosecution Service, or can the police make a decision which says, well, it doesn't really need that, or whatever? Because that's the wee bit I don't understand in terms of that. And I understand it was an emergency call made from the bank. I mean, is that emergency call and 4 or 5 police officers came immediately about a sticker on the bank? That's the stuff that's out there. Whatever the Ombudsman's want to say, I mean, that's the stuff that's known and it's pretty widely known. So a lot of people, which includes myself, I have to say, I think that it wasn't proportionate when you compare it to many other incidents when clearly action had to be taken. So those points need to be made. I don't think it's interfering with the Ombudsman, and I'm not even asking them to answer that question, but let's be clear about that. It's very, people are very sure about what happened there.
Okay, except the public are concerned in certain areas, or yes, some members of the public are concerned. So let's get a response and move on. Hopefully the response will be enough to give you an idea of what's going on, and let the investigation take its course beyond that.
Investigation, only ask one question.
That's okay.
Public prosecution.
Go ahead, Bobby.
So look, I think this is the value that the Ombudsman had in precisely these kind of circumstances where they do polarise opinions and people have perspectives on it as well. And I also appreciate that the assurances that we offer at times just won't be enough for people. Having that external independent scrutiny and oversight can be really helpful. I think, you know, I made the parallel with the CEX incident. I'll say it again. I think it'd be very helpful now that OPONI do review this. And as I've said, you know, we're a learning organisation totally committed to providing the best service. I talked about this in the context of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of protests and demonstrations. And we constantly challenge ourselves around how we're delivering those and constantly look for ways to do them better. So that's what we'll do in this case as well, once the Ombudsman's come back and reported. Ryan, I don't know if you want to cover the disposals piece out of court and the police decision-making element.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Gerry. I mean, our role is investigative. The prosecution service will make the prosecutorial decision, so I'll not get into the actual wherewithal of in terms of whether the offence is made out and whether they feel prosecution is the right way to go. But there was evidence that has been presented in a file through to the public prosecution service, and they'll make the decision on that, Gerry. So it's theirs, not ours.
Can I just on that? I mean, the question was, is there discretion? In other words, is it always sent to the prosecution service, or is it only when there's an arrest? Or what, I mean, do the police have discretion to say, for instance, I'm taking away from this issue, there's no incident, and the police look at it and say, well, you know, it was bad, but, you know, let it go because it's the best thing to do, is there?
Sorry, just again, cautious because the due process and the PPS will be ongoing, but I just think it's important to be clear that there has been a statement of complaint from the property owner, which then clearly says that they are making an accusation around a potential crime, and therefore that starts to bring down one course of action in terms of where it goes, Gerry. So that's an important element. This is a statement of complaint.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm moving to Les Allenby, if you have a question on disciplinary outcomes.
Thanks, Chair. Deputy Chief Constable, moving from one freedom of speech issue to another. I wonder if you could outline what approach PSNI takes within the Code of Ethics and the wider disciplinary procedures in circumstances where an officer or a staff member speaks out publicly on behalf of their federation or association in a formal role. And in particular, if there are ever misconduct proceedings that take place, what's the potential impact of any outcome, for example, even from management advice to more serious outcomes on a person's future career prospects?
Les, thanks. I do really welcome the question. Look, we first of all understand and again fully appreciate the concerns that have been raised with regards to freedom of speech and how we handle complaints relating to those speaking on behalf of staff associations. There are a number of elements to this, and maybe if I just start by saying we really do value the role that our staff associations and their representatives play. It's something as a consequence that we significantly invest in, both in terms of supporting them but also providing resources to them, and have done so over the last number of years. We do that because we really genuinely want candour and honesty in our relationship with them. It makes us stronger together. It's a key element of the whole Team PSNI concept. And we also strongly defend that they should stand up and speak up on behalf of their members. They've helped us bring about continuous improvement in the organisation, and we want that to continue. You know, look, as citizens, we all have a right to freedom of speech under Article 10. But you'll appreciate, I guess, as much as anybody, that whilst this is a fundamental right, it's not absolute for anyone. And crucially, from some of the commentary that I've seen and many of the representations that have been made to us, what I don't think is properly or fully understood by a great many people, but has been long recognised by courts, is reflected in statute, regulation and in our Code of Ethics. Police officers do not have the same freedom of speech as other citizens. By necessity, it has to be limited more than our fellow citizens owing to the unique role with which we're entrusted within our society, and in particular the need to maintain public confidence, impartiality and professional standards. So for the heads of staff associations, or indeed more or less everybody sitting on this panel as senior figures in policing, we do need to be thoughtful, careful about not only what we say, but how we say it. Also, whenever people take on these roles, they do attract a higher level of scrutiny and attention as well, which only really serves to underline that point. Reflecting on this though over the last number of weeks, you know, I certainly think that many of those who are representing these staff associations are from junior ranks. They aren't necessarily trained in, for example, media or have the relevant experience. For the non-statutory staff associations as well, they don't actually have access to professional media advice or legal advice at times as well. And that's something that I want to pick up along with Claire in conversations with them through our Your Voice forum to see if there is more support that we can provide to them and to help them understand the constraints, the parameters in which they have to operate, because at the end of the day, whilst they are representing sections of our workforce, they are ultimately still police officers, and they need to be conscious of that. The second element of the question, which is about how we handle complaints on these matters, and again a concern that has been voiced is that us dealing with complaints or accepting complaints could have a chilling effect in terms of people's ability to be able to speak up. And there, you know, I feel there's a suggestion within that somehow those speaking on behalf of staff associations should be treated differently, and that perhaps allegations of misconduct should be discounted immediately or dealt with more informally. I think whenever people are sort of inferring that, it really seems to be based on the presumption that any and all of those people that make complaints about what they have to say will be doing so maliciously in an attempt to silence them, perhaps because they're motivated by hate and opposed to the opinions of the staff associations. So look, I acknowledge that is still a possibility, but it hasn't been our experience when it comes to the complaints that they are universally being done for malicious purposes. It remains the case for anybody in a staff association or speaking on behalf of them, just as it is for every other police officer, that any referral that's made to us from the office or the Police Ombudsman's office will have to be reviewed by the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And that's actually vital to both the officer but also public confidence in policing, that we have a system that ensures demonstrable accountability, transparency and fair and due process. Again, myself and colleagues can all testify to how unpleasant that particular form of scrutiny can be, but I think it's as simple as this. I think with the great power and privilege that comes with taking on these roles comes great responsibility, and in the case of policing as well, a greater level of accountability. A bit like Ryan has said in terms of the criminal arena as well, I would just stress that the commencement of an investigation is far from a final determination as to whether there has in fact been any misconduct. It's simply the start of due process. Cases which require a balance between the rights of individuals and the limitations placed on police officers can be challenging. They really have to be taken on their own right and will, by necessity, always involve some degree of investigation and objective assessment. But what I would say is that the due process is really important, because it's through that due process that we carry out the assessment around what has been said, and it's there that we can take account of the potential malign motivations of people as well. So to reinforce, we are absolutely alive to the potential for the complaint system to be abused, but that due process does allow us to guard against it. I can probably talk a bit more in the private session, but I can say that having conducted a bit of a review, no member of a staff association, to our knowledge, has ever actually received a formal misconduct sanction in respect of anything that they've said publicly. You alluded to management advice. There have been a number of instances where management advice has been provided to people for social media comments, but there is no impact on their career or no ramification for future promotions or anything like that. And actually, in the main, the management advice that's being offered is about reminding people about the application of the Code of Ethics and the restrictions that exist. And as I said, I now want to take that a bit further to see if there's more practical support that can be provided to assist them.
Chair, Bobby, thanks. Just a quick comment in return. There is no absolute free pass whether you're a staff member or the head of a staff association, so absolutely understand that. I guess the point I'm making is about, I'm not suggesting there is a difference, should be a difference in treatment, but there is a kind of understanding that contextually, and this is where the nuances come in, that if somebody is on a legitimate basis representing their members, then that is a context that's different from somebody speaking out with a personal view on something. And it's that recognition of that context, which I think is probably important, particularly where somebody may well be saying something which might be contentious within kind of, other parts of the police service, whether in Northern Ireland or beyond. And it's that context that I think is just important. So I kind of welcome that there is some work being done here, and that's helpful, and I'm happy to pick that up in the private session. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's it in a nutshell. And again, just by way of reassurance, it's precisely that kind of context. And I can say from having reviewed individual cases that comes into account, it's taken into account appropriately at the relevant time in terms of assessing whether something has amounted to misconduct, and in fact as well what the appropriate way is to deal with it.
Okay, thank you. I'm moving to the next question from Trevor on sickness and absence.
No, that's it. Got that earlier.
Ill health.
I rolled it into the...
Oh yes, you've covered that. Great, thank you. Tommy, question on community background monitoring.
Thank you. So the statistics you provided on stop and search as well as part of the question. In recent months there have been positive discussions with Melanie at the board's performance committee on the pilot project which is leading to understand the community backgrounds of people stopped by the PSNI using the stop and search powers provided under the Justice and Security Act of 2007. These discussions have focused on the wording of the community background questions to be asked of the individual who's been stopped, when the questions are to be asked, during the time that the person has been stopped, the categorisation of the individuals in terms of their community background, and the important role that the body-worn videos can play in protecting both the member of the public and also the police officers. It's hoped that the pilot will now produce robust data which will enable the PSNI to comply with its responsibilities under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, as well as which protects the right to privacy, as well as being able to demonstrate to communities that the application of these powers is being done in a way that's fair, lawful, proportionate and accountable. However, the PSNI also have powers to stop and search individuals under a range of other legislation, and in fact 85% of the stops that are taking place is under that legislation. And it's equally important that they're able to demonstrate that when they use these powers, they're doing so in a manner which is fair, lawful, proportionate and accountable. Can you tell the board, taking on board the learning from the JSA pilot, can you outline for the board any plans that the PSNI may have to introduce arrangements for the monitoring of community background for individuals stopped and searched under the non-JSA legislation, such as PACE or the Misuse of Drugs Act?
I'll ask Mel to speak to this one.
Thank you, thank you, Tommy. First of all, can I just say that I really do value the support, the oversight and the scrutiny of board members, and particularly the Performance Committee with that piece of work. I've been really open with the committee. It looks like a simple thing to do. It's much more complicated than I anticipated, and it's taken us a while to try and get something that gives us that robust data set. Board members will be very familiar that there's been many recommendations over many years around the collation of community background monitoring data around JSA and terrorism searches. And that was brought into sharp focus with the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Ramsey, which has resulted in us really determined to deliver this piece of work. I have to say the ambitious part of me wanted to develop a methodology from this piece of work, from the JSA and the terrorism, that we could easily transfer into other stop and search powers, and also into things like collation of community background of victims so we understood them better. I have now accepted that what we develop for this particular search priorities is not easily applied to others, because the relevant communities, the stakeholder communities, the communities of interest will be different for PACE, misuse of drugs, stop and search, than they would necessarily be. So it's not a lift up and move across, but there are definitely lessons we can learn from it. Under the PACE Code of Practice around stop and search, there is already a facility for officers to collate officer-defined ethnicity. So we do have a starting point that wasn't available in the JSA and the TACT search. So we do collate some community background, but it is officer-defined, not self-defined. So I suppose the short answer is yes, I would want to expand it, but it would have to be expanded in a way that plots and understands the relevant communities in relation to the other stop and search powers and takes account of them in the data collection that we do. So it won't be a direct lift of what we're doing around justice and security and terrorism into misuse of drugs. It's important that we understand the other communities that would have concerns and a stakeholder in it, and that we account for that in the data collection to make sure it adds the best possible value to our accountability, our continual learning and our data collection.
Thank you, Mel. I'm still trying to understand in terms of what would be the difference between young people, and remember that we're talking here that in terms of people who are being stopped and searched, the vast majority are young people who are below the age of 25, and they're the vast majority. And I'm trying to understand what would be the difference between asking them community background questions under the Justice and Security Act and asking them questions under PACE. Because, I mean, really what we're trying to do here is we need to recognise that communities really want to understand. We have to build the trust with communities that these powers are being used fairly and openly. And the only way we'll be able to do that is by ensuring that the information in terms of how it's being used is made available publicly in due course. So I just need to understand that whenever young people are stopped on the Shankill or stopped on Falls Road, that the questions that are being asked about their community background, what would be different in terms of between Justice Security Act and PACE?
Yeah, Tommy, I think young people are a group that are absolutely in common with whatever search powers we exercise, but it's been well publicised nationally that a key area of concern around misuse of Drugs Act searches has been the disproportionality that exists around black and minority ethnic communities, which in our current data collection for justice and security and terrorism, we haven't made that differentiation into that data set. So there'll be groups that will be missing that I think would be groups that would be concerned around the application of stop and search in misuse of drugs. So it's not a lock up, it's not a lift up and just drop it on. It's important that we understand where there may be disproportionality and that we're collecting data to identify, seek it out, understand it and then address it. So some groups would be consistent across, some wouldn't.
Okay, and that's fine. And we understand that given that 93% of the people who are stopped at the moment are white, okay, take the point in terms that there may be an issue around ethnicity. I think what I'm looking from today is the commitment from the PSNI that as we roll out the JSA pilot and it comes to an end, that the next stage in the process will be a commitment to move on to the PACE and the Misuse of Drugs Act as being the next stage in that process. And that's really the commitment I'm looking for today.
Yeah, Tommy, you certainly have my personal commitment on that. It would obviously need to go through governance across the organisation, but certainly my personal ambition and commitment is that we roll it out across that. And then we look at the value it might add to things like victims of crime, because I think we have victims groups that I think would benefit from us understanding that. So I would say the disability community would be relevant. And some of our LGBTQ plus communities will be relevant, but again, slightly different methodology, but the same purpose and intention and commitment.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Kate on a question on the recent Winston Irvine case.
Sorry,
Do you
Chair,
want to come in on this?
just on a wee supplementary.
Okay,
On,
keep it short, please.
Thomas, I was just wondering, is there any data on the use of officer-defined community background in relation to the use of non-GSA and GSA stop and search?
Yes, Mark, that data is collected and published, so that data is available. We can make that available to you if you would like it.
Thank you. Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy, in light of recent developments surrounding the trial and sentencing of Winston Irvine, public confidence in the justice system has been notably impacted. Could you provide clarification or assurance regarding the process involved, specifically the provision of character references, the sentencing decision, and any broader implications for public trust in the administration of justice?
Yes, Kate, and thanks for the question. I think this case and the debates around it undoubtedly has impacted on confidence in the entire criminal justice system as the face, the front end of that. It's also impacted on policing. I'm going to ask Davy to comment specifically on issues surrounding the offences charged and the issues with sentencing as well. But before I do, I would like to take the opportunity to say that I personally was very frustrated when I read in the media, in one particular outlet, a reference to my evidence in the case, which appeared under the headline, Winky Irvine's host of top-level referees, some of whom wanted to hide their identity to the public. I wasn't offered a right of reply to the article prior to publication. If I had been, I would have sought to clarify my position, but I'll take the opportunity now, thank you. So, for clarity, I absolutely did not provide a character reference to Mr. Irvine, nor was I asked to, and if I had been, I absolutely wouldn't have done so. My evidence that was referred to in that article was as a witness called to the preliminary inquiry, where I was questioned under oath. What I would say is that as Mr. Irvine's arrest by our counter-terrorism officers and the subsequent investigation by our terrorism investigation unit demonstrates, we police without fear or favour, and that's exactly the way it should be. I'll now ask Davy just to comment on the offences charged more generally and the sentencing.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe just to pick up on some of the context around this. So, in short, the processes relating to the provision and consideration of character references are a matter for the court. Similarly, the sentencing decision is again a matter that is for the judiciary alone, so police have no role in respect of character references or indeed the sentencing. It may help the board just to sort of consider the context around sentencing. So in Northern Ireland, common law principles and specific statutory provisions, notably the Criminal Justice Northern Ireland Order 2008, provide the sentencing process. That order sets out some general sentencing principles, and that includes elements such as the seriousness of the offence, aggravating and mitigating factors, and a reduction in sentencing for guilty pleas. And that, I suppose, order provides the cornerstone around sentencing provision in Northern Ireland. Sentencing guidelines in Northern Ireland have also been developed with the aim of promoting consistency and transparency in sentencing decisions. But again, this is a framework, and it is not the role of the police, it is a role of the courts in terms of the interpretation and the application of that. So it's important just to draw that distinction around that, but hopefully that provides something around sort of the context within that. I'm also conscious that my understanding is that the PPS are still considering the potential for an appeal to this particular sentence. So I think we're probably limited in terms of delving into the details around the case. But there's been significant press coverage and details in the public domain in that regard. What I would say that Winston Irvine was arrested on the 8th of June 2022 under the Terrorism Act. There was a thorough investigation by detectives from our terrorist investigation unit. And we did consult with the Public Prosecution Service, as is the norm and as would be expected in those circumstances. And as such, each case needs to be considered on its own merits and the strength of the available evidence. And as a result of that consultation, charges were put to Mr. Irvine as agreed by the PPS. And those are then reviewed as the investigation progresses, again on the basis of the evidence that is available. There has been some commentary around the weapons themselves, and I can confirm that ballistic testing of all the firearms was conducted, and there was no previous history in respect of those firearms or indeed the ammunition. So that's where we are broadly in terms of the specific case. What I would say is that our role is absolutely clear. Our role is to investigate, and it's to place evidence before the court. And I would say at the outset that we remain absolutely committed to the robust investigation of all terrorist and paramilitary activity, wherever that may come from, and I've previously made those remarks today. I think the work that is covered within the accountability report and indeed our serious and organised crime performance report outlines and evidences that work right across Northern Ireland and across all respective groups. And I think that work also emphasises the activity around our paramilitary crime task force. And I think it's important to again use this opportunity to repeat some of those figures, because I think they underscore our commitment to address that form of criminality. So from inception, the PCTF have conducted in the region of 1,200 searches. We've seized over £8 million worth of drugs. We've seized over 400 weapons and firearms. We have made over 500 arrests. We have charged over 500 suspects, and we've seized over £1.4 million in cash. So hopefully that provides the board with some confidence and reassurance around our commitment to do everything we can to address criminality, terrorism and paramilitary influence across our communities here in Northern Ireland. I think it's also useful, the independent reviewer of the Terrorism Act recently issued a report. Now that report was specific to the Southport incident last summer, but I think there's some good references in terms of what needs to be met in terms of that threshold around terrorism. And in that report, the reviewer talked about 3 limbs of the offence that must be proven. Limb 1 is around the use or threat of action that hits a certain threshold of seriousness. Limb 2 talks about the use or threat must occur on a wider scale than the personal. And Limb 3 talks about the use or threat must pursue a specific objective being made for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial or ideological cause. So hopefully that provides a wee bit of context around the thresholds where we have to get evidence to a level to prove offences, and we will continue to do everything we can to try and achieve that. So hopefully that provides a wee bit of context around it.
Thank you for that, Director General. Appreciate your patience. We've got 3 more questions, then we'll be moving to your report. Next one is from Trevor on Operation Logic.
Yeah, well, you've made reference today obviously about confidence in policing, and I think you've talked about obviously your concerns about your scrutiny, and of course the person responsible for that is the Ombudsman in some cases, as well as this board. This operation has run for a long time now. I think public confidence could wane on the length of time that it's taken. So can you outline exactly where this external investigation is at? Much reference is made over the last number of months about the Ombudsman and her work, so clearly she's back to work, and we're just curious where this investigation sits now and when it'll come to a conclusion.
So, Chair, Trevor, as you'll be aware, Operation Logic is independently investigated by officers from Greater Manchester and West Midlands Police. I can tell you that the investigation has progressed. It's now progressed to the stage where a report has been submitted to the Public Prosecution Service. I have no further update beyond that at this time.
That's useful. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Question from Keith on the recent Supreme Court judgment.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Deputy Chief Constable. My questions are relating to the recent Supreme Court ruling on the definition of a male and female. Surprisingly, it took a Supreme Court to define that. Most people at P1 or P2 had that worked out, but we'll leave that there. So my question is, what implications will that have on the PSNI, that court ruling?
Well, thanks for the question, Keith. Just give me a moment while I try and locate it. Yeah. Obviously, we continue, along with policing nationally, to consider the impact of the ruling. In terms of the operational impacts, it will certainly impact in terms of how we approach strip search, stop and search, in addition to many other aspects of PSNI policy in regard to gender determination. We, as I say, aren't alone in terms of having to grapple with the findings of the Supreme Court. We're assisted by a National Police Chiefs Council coordination group, which has been established. The first meeting of that group was held back on the 30th of April, and PSNI continue to be represented at the meeting. An internal working group has been established under ACC Anthony McNally, who I'm just checking to see if he hasn't managed to join us yet. But Anthony is assessing the kind of cross-cutting impacts of this for PSNI and will help us develop any required adjustments to our policies and processes. And again, that will replicate the national work, which is broadly fallen under 4 headings, which is around search guidance, toilets and single-sex facilities, wider implications for policing and engagement and communication. Internal considerations around shared spaces, estates and other procedures impacted are being considered by that working group. It has a broad representation of officers and staff from across PSNI and does include staff association representatives as well. We've also been engaged here through the Northern Ireland Executive with the Department of Justice, and we are aware that they have written to the Home Secretary and the Home Office in terms of seeking clarity on whether amendments will be required to the PACE Codes of Practice. In addition as well, we know that the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland are also involved in helping us seek some further direction in terms of the impacts for policing. The National Police Chiefs Council did recently release interim guidance on the matter, and we're working our way through that with the next meeting again of our internal working group scheduled for the 9th of June. So the guidance is also expected to be issued by the Northern Ireland Equality Commission later this month, and again it aims to support employers in terms of understanding their duties and to help them put them into practice. And this will be something that will again be monitored by that internal working group. Claire, I don't know if you want to add anything on that? No?
No? Do you know?
I appreciate you getting more information that comes forward. When do you visit the timeline?
There's a problem with a microphone here, somebody.
Sorry about that. Have you any indication, Bobby, of timeline of when all those possible changes will be in place?
It's hard to be fixed on that, but certainly that information from the Equality Commission is fairly key whenever it comes later this month.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all of the questions. And I'm going to move to Director General now. And before we listen to your opening remarks, I have a few things to say. And I'm not going to say thank you to the PSNI just yet, because you may be brought in on the questions with the NCA as well, so you're not off the hook yet. Thank you for your report, and as I said earlier on, your patience. Your report provides a vast amount of information on the work of the agency, and as you will be aware, in the new policing plan for 2025 to 2030, we have a measure on tackling organised crime in all its forms. When I read the scope and scale of some of the investigations led and supported by the NCA, we are very grateful for the expertise and reach that your organisation brings. And of course, the agency had a very significant drugs find here a couple of weeks ago. We all know the importance of the NCA's work in supporting the work of the PSNI here. In respect of the 140 disruptions which are referenced in your report, it would be very helpful for us if you could provide assessment in your opening remarks of the increases and the decreases referenced, and also the trends here compared to those nationally. And perhaps you could also touch on the implications of the funding situation and your ability to deliver going forward in relation to that. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to hand over to you now, Graham, if you want to give us some of your remarks, and then we'll move to questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. It's, as always, good to be here, and I say this at the start of every one of my sessions, but we take very seriously our responsibilities in Northern Ireland, as we do across the rest of the UK, and we take very seriously our accountability alongside our PSNI colleagues to the Northern Ireland Policing Board. So a pleasure to be here, and very happy to wait. No problem. Just a quick, Bobby referenced at the start that I might support him or say something about complexity in the law enforcement landscape, and that pertains to funding for all of us. So just first a word on that. So crime overall has gone down across the UK, as it has in Northern Ireland. If you look over the last 20, 30 years, the overall trend has been in that direction. And yet, within the crime that remains, we have seen increasing amounts of serious and organised crime. We've seen increasing amounts of vulnerability crimes, domestic abuse, child sexual abuse, crimes that are effectively hidden. So both sets of those crimes are more complex to investigate. They take more time, they take more effort. Separately, within society, we have all just got more digital and data devices. All of that is available. That needs to be reviewed. That provides a new attack surface, but just an awful lot more data to look at as you do any investigation. When we are then taking cases to court, and I think this is a UK and probably a global point rather than a Northern Ireland one, the threshold is higher to get over the line. All the standards that are in place to avoid miscarriages of justice mean that we have to do more work on each case to cross that threshold and make the case. The implication of that is it feels to me that the cost per case has gone up quite significantly over a period of time, even though the overall number of cases has gone down. And of course, all of our work, and we've seen that in the questions that you have been asking of PSNI, takes place in the daily glare of social media commentary, of the videoing of individual incidents, which is something that our predecessors did just not have to deal with. So that's just to back up Bobby's point earlier on about the complexity that we are all working within. So then just the overall threat from serious and organised crime, kind of nationally and globally. We publish an assessment every year. We published our last assessment in March. So just a couple of headlines from that. So overall, we have assessed that the threat from serious and organised crime has gone up over the last year, albeit at a slightly slower pace than previously. When we break it down into the individual threat types, we've seen increases in child sexual abuse, in drugs, in fraud, in illicit finance and money laundering, and in organised immigration crime. We have not seen increases, it's been relatively flat, in firearms crimes, in cyber crimes, in modern slavery and human trafficking, and in organised acquisitive crime. So several that have gone up and a number that have stayed stable. a few macro trends within all of that. Increases in illegal immigration, I mean, globally, absolutely throughout Europe and absolutely in the UK, are really stark and becoming an increasing priority, not just for governments, but for law enforcement and absolutely for the NCA. While here in Belfast, we're obviously a long way away from the English Channel, we do see that organised immigration crime impact Northern Ireland too, for a number of reasons, but including the common travel area. We had the safeguarding, but also some arrests around 14 migrants discovered in Loch Ryan in December 2024, and we had a 3-week intensification alongside our colleagues in PSNI, Home Office Immigration Enforcement, and the Garda as well, just last month, which led to 25 arrests in Northern Ireland, 33 in general. So we're seeing illegal immigration play out as a challenge for us all. We have seen increases over a period of time in the drugs threat to kind of globally and in the UK, and I'll come back to that specifically in relation to Northern Ireland. And then thirdly, the other big trend we have seen is the risk that we all face from the fact that we are living our lives more online than we ever used to do. We are living and working and playing online, and we see that play out then in crimes in relation to online fraud, cyber crimes, and child sexual abuse and exploitation. And the particular example of that we highlighted in our March publication was the emergence over the last 2 years, but particularly over the last year, of a newish phenomenon generally called the COM, which is a grouping of kind of online gangs of boys with a kind of nihilistic, misogynistic bent, who focus on grooming and coercing often young girls into abusing themselves and into self-harm. And this is particularly an English-speaking phenomenon at the moment, does not appear to have spread to the rest of the world, but it causes enormous harm to the individuals that get involved in it. So we did an alert out to Chief Constables in March. We have a number of live investigations into it across the UK. We've had a number of prosecutions so far. We have not had incidences of this play out that we have seen in Northern Ireland yet. We don't have any active investigations in relation to Northern Ireland, but that will come. That is just an inevitable part of what we are dealing with. It is just the latest manifestation of the challenges, massive opportunities as well, of course, but the challenges that come from living life online and the weird polarisation and normalisation of extreme behaviour that you see there. Moving on to the report that we have provided in relation to our activity in Northern Ireland. As you said, Chair, overall disruptions over the last 6 months, 140, so that's an increase of 31 on the previous 6 months. There are ups and downs within that, as you alluded to, and some of those I think are just a factor or a function of the fact we're giving you 6-month snippets, and so it's harder to see the long-term trend. So one of the reflections we've had from looking at the report is that we need to provide that long-term trend, so a kind of 5-year set of the 6-month periods, and we can see more clearly what's happening. So we have, for example, seen minor disruptions go up and moderate disruptions go up, but the major ones have slipped in the last 6 months. We don't think that's a material long-standing trend. The long-standing trend, which has been part of our strategy, is to increase the number and proportion of disruptions we have that are major and moderate. I think that is still happening. We just happen to have had a 6-month period where particularly the drug and fraud disruptions have not been significant. So I don't think that is material kind of long-term position. One thing you'll also have seen flagged up in the report is that the proportion of drug disruptions is lower in Northern Ireland than in the rest of the UK. That's actually a function of the huge number of what we call border referrals that we've had in the rest of the UK. And there's been an increase in Northern Ireland, but a much smaller increase. So by border referrals, this is primarily people who are coming into airports with suitcases that are full of cannabis. And they are identified by Border Force and referred to the NCA for investigation. And we would typically in a year have 200 of those. In the last year we had 1,000. So they have, over the last 2 years, basically increased fivefold. It's been a very, very significant trend and a very big drain on our resources. And that's played out. That started off in London, primarily around Heathrow, and has spread to a series of other airports. We have seen increases in Northern Ireland. This was pretty rare. We had 13 border referrals last year of that type. But the increase here has been much lower. So we've seen our overall statistics being really quite skewed by the number of these border referrals that we've had in the rest of the UK. So it's more of a function of what's been happening in the rest of the UK rather than a change in Northern Ireland. You'll have seen also, you asked for the things that have gone up and down, an increase in the illicit finance disruptions. So that is a result, and I'll come back to it, of some really good asset recovery work. And Davey was touching on the work of the Paramilitary Crime Task Force alongside the Paramilitary Crime Task Force. It's been as a result of increasingly good work by our Financial Intelligence Unit with PSNI. It's been the offshoot of some continuing covert investigations that we have got, and also some of it is the function of our big Operation Destabilise that I spoke about the last time I was here, a big investigation into Russian-linked cryptocurrency money laundering kind of globally, which had a nexus in the UK. So that's what's behind the increase in illicit finance disruptions. I was going to mention 3 areas in a little more detail. I don't know if you've got time at the moment, or I could come back at the end or in the private session. If you're kind of
maybe come back in the private session.
Really.
Some of those may be teased out with questions.
Yeah,
that
very happy
members
to do that.
And before we move on, I'm going to go slightly off agenda. Could I ask you, Deputy Chief Constable, to give a very short, sweet summary of the relationship between NCA and the PSNI, just for the benefit of those online?
Well, of course, in the kind of larger strategic sense, NCA are a key partner, allowing us to tap into not only national capabilities, but they're also really our gateway to international law enforcement and dealing with transnational issues. I mean, my involvement with them, as you know, Chair, goes back a good 10 years now to having been co-located and working hand in glove with the National Crime Agency as part of the Paramilitary Crime Task Force. So they are a huge asset to us here in Northern Ireland. And in fact, Graham and I had a conversation earlier in the week, just again looking at that to see how we might enhance that going forward. You know, we're obviously, as the board know, quite excited about Kinniger and the prospects of having, amongst other things, a crime campus. And again, having discussions now about how we might potentially work with the National Crime Agency and others to enhance the already existing really strong relationships in a co-located fashion is something that I think we're going to look at in the not too distant future.
And if I can just add on that, on the relationship, I mean, it is really strong, and it's strong bilaterally, and it is better than it has been, and we are doing more together than we used to do, and the relationships across the whole of the senior team are strong. But it's also a trilateral relationship with the guards as well, and the cross-border work that we are doing, the conference that Bobby and Davey, I think, were both at, along with one of my senior officers a couple of months ago. And as you know, I was in Dublin earlier in the year, seeing the Commissioner and the guards as well. So that's a really important aspect of the relationship too.
Okay, I'm going to move to the first question from Nuala.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction. At the start, one of my questions, you covered half of it with regards to the slight drop in the past 6 months, and just looking at the last quarter specifically, if you just might go into a wee bit more of the why. You know, you're saying you would like to look at the trends over a couple of years, and you're saying it's not unusual, so if you could just provide us with a bit more confidence as to the why. And the other issue that I want to ask is, you spoke about this online campaign, or is the CALM, did you call it? Mm-hmm. You know, I think online safety of children in particular is just very important. We see kids getting phones at a much younger age these days, and kids being able to bring them into school as well. And it is really, really concerning. So I think this is an opportunity, given we are unique in Northern Ireland, placed to actually hold yourselves to account on these issues in this public forum, to actually outline any advice and guidance for parents or schools with regards to helping keep children safe online, and in particular around this threat, because it does seem rather sinister given what we've just had, the sentence that we've just had over the past 6 months, and the crimes that resulted of that. I think it's very important to use this platform here today then to offer any advice that you can, or that we should be doing, because it is not just a policing response, but with regards to work that the NCA has done, in particular with the UK government in tackling this issue, and what we can do here in Northern Ireland as well.
Thank you, Nuala. So on your first part of the question, not get too close to the microphone, on the first part of the question, I mean, our strategy has been to increase the proportion of major and moderate disruptions generally throughout the UK, and of a particular type. And that has happened, and it's happened even in this quarter. It's just the major, which is one set of those, which has dipped from 14 to 6. The numbers are too small, I think, 14.6, to really draw too much from it on just a 1 6-month kind of period. The casework is so kind of unpredictable at how long it will take to conclude that I think it is just a number that we need to accept, but not be too concerned about. If we see a trend over a longer period of time where the number is heading down, then I will be concerned. For 1 6-month period, I am not. But that's why I think it's really important to get that longer trend and have it in front of you, so I and you can interrogate it really well.
Staffing issues or something, or like?
No, I don't think there is any particular rhyme or reason to it. We've got some ongoing covert investigations which just haven't concluded yet. They might have concluded in this month. They'll hopefully conclude in the next 6 months. And as you see, the overall numbers are going up, and it's not a function of the staffing. On the online safety, so there are lots of aspects to this. It was one of the areas I was going to cover. So on the COM, as I said, we sent out an alert to Chief Constables to alert them to this. We have also on sextortion, so not the same. So sextortion tends to be largely West African criminal groups. I've mentioned this before at the Northern Ireland Policing Board, who pretend to be typically young girls and get in touch with teenagers or young men and persuade them to send illicit, indecent images to them and then blackmail them. And that's a particular kind of crime type. It is not done for sexual gratification. It is done for money. And unlike some of the other crime types, it does not take place over a long period of time. These are very, very quick to bang. So that is a real challenge that has increased in the last few years. The numbers have stabilised over the last 12 months, actually, but it is dreadful, and we have seen suicides across the UK. I don't think in Northern Ireland there has been, from boys who are kind of caught by this and just so embarrassed that they don't know what to do. So we did a media campaign on that in I think March last year, and we did another social media campaign on this in March this year. We have also sent, as we did the previous year, an alert out to schools and education authorities to help them think about how they talk about this to their students, but also with guidance on how they can communicate with parents so that those parents can speak to the children as well and help them protect them. And we did that, as I said, again, this year. We worked with PSNI and the Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland to get to an agreed product, and that's gone out to all education authorities. So that is part of the prevent work that we do. As I mentioned, it is West African in origin, very largely this particular crime type, the sextortion, and we're working with our colleagues in Nigeria, in Ghana, to try and identify some of those groups, and that has been a priority, not just for us, but actually for the UK government, and we had one of the UK ministers out there quite recently trying to develop that connection. There is also the Online Safety Act that the UK government passed 2 years ago now, and which is coming into force kind of progressively. But some provisions came into force in the spring, and some in relation to children are coming into force in the summer. And there is a really big responsibility on Ofcom to now police that, to use the regulation they've got and hold the tech companies to account to make the platforms that they are making available to children safe for those children. And there have been steps forward in that with various of the tech companies who've put provisions in place, but there is more that they need to do to make the platforms safer. The other point I'd make on the broader aspect of child sexual abuse is that the number of referrals that we are getting, largely from the US tech companies, largely into a organisation called NCMEC in the US that then come to police forces around the world, and they come to the NCA in the UK, they have been going up exponentially, particularly over the last 2 years. Now, those are hugely useful for us because they are indications of crimes taking place and of victims that we can potentially safeguard, but it is a massive challenge in terms of the workload that it brings with it. So typically 2 years ago, we would be sending 10 or 15 of those referrals to PSNI every week. So still an enormous amount, 2 a day, but that's doubled over the last 6 months. And there is a good chance with the amount that is coming into us that it will go up by the same amount again. So you could well have 30 to 35 referrals coming in to some of Davy's teams, I think your teams, aren't they, every week. Now, that's a really big challenge for the NCA to manage that volume, to do all the development and work on it, the intelligence development to help geolocate, to help provide as much details to the forces as we can. But it's then also a real challenge for every force around the UK in terms of PSNI as well, to provide the right resourcing into those teams so that they can action the reports when they come. So that's a real significant joint challenge that we have.
Thank you for that. And you've obviously been listening into the full board. Do you have anything to say or comment with regards to the NCA's role in Northern Ireland tackling paramilitary activity with regards to the criminal justice outcomes? Because, the recent case and then what Gerry and I also raised in North Belfast, the Winston Irvine case, it is very, very frustrating, but the NCA also does have a role with regards to actually implementing the terrorism legislation. Is there any comments that you would like to provide with regards to what role or greater role the NCA can actually take on to see more of these tested in court to get the outcomes that's needed?
Yeah, really happy to. So it is an important part of our work, and we will come across paramilitary elements in some of our organised crime investigation, criminal organised crime investigations with PSNI, absolutely. The main thing, though, that we are adding, and again, I've spoken at the policing board about this before, is the work we're doing on civil recovery rather than criminal investigation. So going after the money, which is the product of crime, rather than the individuals, and prosecuting them for crimes that have taken place. That obviously still needs to happen and does, but there's a really useful tool in our toolbox as well of being able to do the civil recovery work, which is to a different version of proof. So at court, on civil recovery cases, we need to prove on the balance of probability that the money is the proceeds of crime, whereas in a criminal investigation, it needs to be beyond reasonable doubt. So that's a really useful tool in our toolbox. It's an important part of our work, including with PSNI. We've got 10 investigations at the moment, civil recovery investigations ongoing that are in Northern Ireland. We do proportionally much more of this in Northern Ireland than we do anywhere else in the UK, just because of the impact that we think it can have and the importance that we attach to it. There are 2 cases particularly mentioned in our report. One that is investigating about £350,000 worth of assets, where we think there may be some money laundering, but also tax offences behind it. That one is progressing well. We are positive about it. There's another one in there referencing £250,000 worth of assets, a money laundering suspicion behind that, and disclosure interviews have happened, and again we are positive about that, but those are just 2 of the 10. So just to briefly mention a couple of the others, we've got a really long-standing case, and sometimes these civil recovery cases do take a long time in relation to assets of £3.5 million, and we really are quite positive about that coming to a conclusion relatively soon. And then we've got other cases that we've started more recently, so just to mention 2 of them, one into assets of 700,000, where the money we think might be the proceeds of drugs, money laundering and benefit fraud, and we're preparing disclosure orders and property freezing orders on that case. Another of assets of 350,000 where the offences we think the assets may be the product of are fraud, drugs and money laundering, and again we're preparing disclosure orders on those, and we'll hope to go to court relatively soon. So that's a really big focus of our work, and we think it does make a difference absolutely on the crime involved, but also in terms of public confidence, and we've seen that in other cases that you have seen play out in Northern Ireland before.
Okay, thank you. Davy, sorry, you wanted to come in on this very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just to pick up on the point that Graham referred to in terms of the referrals coming in, and just to give you some idea in terms of the quantum that we're actually dealing with. So those are referrals in respect of potential indecent images of children. Last financial year, we received in the region of 820 referrals from NCA in respect of that activity that require investigation and further research, etc. To give you an idea in terms of the growth of that, if you turn the clock back probably 10, 12 years, we were receiving around 60 to 80 of those referrals. Last year it was 820. This year, and we're in the early stage of the financial year, we're seeing an increase again of about 120%. So significant increases, significant risks, significant demands in terms of the resourcing, the management and the investigation of those issues as well. If I could just touch on the PCTF issue again, just for clarity for the board. Again, we are focused on 6 groups. East Belfast UVF, West Belfast UDA, Belfast INLA, the North West INLA, South East Antrim UDA and North Antrim UDA. Those are the main groups that we focus on, and that's in respect of the potential harm that those groups are causing to the local communities. Those groups are involved in a wide range of criminality involving, but not limited to, assaults, shootings, supply and distribution of controlled drugs, extortion, intimidation, money lending and money laundering. And again, in the reports, both in terms of Graham's report and our own report in terms of serious and organised crime, I would ask the members just to refer to that. There's significant evidence in terms of our commitment, our work on a daily basis. The Deputy talked about the breadth and the complexity of work that's undertaken every day. Hopefully, those reports provide you with some flavour of that breadth and the complexity of the work and the endeavours that we undertake. And we are seeing significant disruptions. 35 searches in the period that the report refers to, 9 arrests, £1.8 million worth of drugs seized, £38,000 in cash seized. So all that is that continued effort to address that criminality, and it is having an impact. There's more work to be done, absolutely, and we talked about some of that work in terms of North Belfast and the particular issues that we face, but we will continue to pursue those groups and their activities. Thank you.
Next question is from Brendan on drugs. Sorry, question from Brendan about drugs. This came up earlier as well. Is it a recurring theme?
Couldn't possibly comment. Chair, thank you. Director General, thank you for your report. I attended recently a presentation from a US law enforcement officer on the growth in the synthetic drugs market, which is some new reference in your report. And the point that he made was that the reason for the growth is pure economics, that you can buy a kilogram of fentanyl for $32,000 and it produces $28 million of pills. And they also mentioned that there are 100,000 deaths a year from fentanyl in the US. So that because of this, within the US, the law enforcement agencies have been working very assiduously in tackling the problem. And so the market for synthetic drugs in the US has become much more difficult for the cartels who are driving it. And as a result, they are expanding their operations into Europe. So I was interested in terms of the growth that you see in the synthetic drugs market. Is it being driven by local organised crime groups, or is it actually being driven from further afield, such as from the cartels, and the type of approach that you're taking to that? And then more locally, I would be then interested in, with regard to Northern Ireland, what's the picture in terms of the synthetic drugs market and the approach being taken by the PSNI?
Sure. Really important issue, Brendan. So, I mean, we have been concerned about synthetic opioids for a long time, not least because our US colleagues have been telling us about the huge challenges they've had in the US. And you were also right. I mean, it was 75 to 80,000 deaths in the US the year before last. It's actually come down. So they have been working quite effectively at trying to reduce it. A lot of that's been, I mean, fantastic law enforcement work, but the Drug Enforcement and Administration in the US has also really been pushing the public health one pill can kill message, and that has begun to really resonate across the US. So we've been really worried about this in the UK. Fentanyl specifically came. We had a minor outbreak of that in 2018-19, I think. I mean, scores, not hundreds, which did not last long. And law enforcement, and this was not in Northern Ireland. It was from memory around Manchester and Liverpool. We stamped on it really hard, and it kind of disappeared at that point. We've had occasional small outbreaks of fentanyl in the UK since, but it's never really caught on, and it is still incredibly small in the numbers we see in the UK. What we have seen, though, is nitazines, which is another synthetic opioid, and quite often is more powerful than fentanyl. So fentanyl is the one that's got the kind of brand name from the US. Nitazines is the one that has hit the UK more and is at least as dangerous. That started emerging in the UK in June 23, so kind of almost 2 years ago when we started seeing that. And since then, up until the end of March, which is the last set of data that we've got, we've had 494 people in the UK die from nitazines. Now, that is still a small proportion of overall drug deaths, which are approaching 5,000, but it has risen from almost nothing, and it is different in the way it kills. Most of the drug deaths that we have are habitual drug users for a few decades, and it has taken a real toll on their body, and eventually they have an overdose and die. With nitazines or other synthetic opioids, it can be the first time you use a drug, and it is just so strong that it kills you. So the pattern of who is being killed by these drugs is potentially very different. So we are very concerned about it growing. We have therefore been working incredibly hard at it. And what we've actually seen is not increased exponentially in the way that we thought it might. And that is partly, I'm sure, because of the efforts that we, and when I say we, I mean a very broad cohort, the NCA is one part of it, of organisations have been making to try and stamp on it. So we have a project on this, PSNI are part of it, all police forces, every SIO who comes across any synthetic opioid feeding into it. We've been doing a lot of work with coroners and digital forensics people, so we can get the testing done on drugs really quickly and identify where it is happening. You said you talked about the cost of fentanyl, for example, and that's one reason why it has been so successful for the criminals. The same is true of nitazines. One reason why criminals might turn to this is both the markup you can have is very significant, but also the quantities you need are smaller. So when you're looking to smuggle something into the country, it is easier to do than it would be for cocaine or heroin or cannabis, because you need much less of it to produce a dose. So both of those reasons make it attractive for criminals. In terms of the way it's played out in Northern Ireland, we have not seen much of it here yet. So 494 deaths across the UK. To take Scotland as an example, and there's been more in Scotland than anywhere else, over 100 in Scotland, deaths in Scotland from nitazines, 5 so far that we have recorded in Northern Ireland. So we've had proportionally much less in Northern Ireland. Now, drug markets around the UK do vary slightly, and that is part of it, but so far it is not caught on here. But it's something that we are really, really attuned to, working incredibly hard on, and working really closely with PSNI on. So, Davey, if you want to add.
Yeah, just to add, I think the majority of the issues have been covered, but yeah, we are still making significant seizures in terms of all types of drugs, over £13 million worth of drugs seized over the reporting period that we're referring to here. Drugs deaths, again, primarily we are seeing combination of illicit prescription drugs being a particular issue in terms of drugs deaths. But Graham has mentioned the small number at this stage in terms of synthetic drugs. In terms of the quantity of drugs that we're seizing, we're still the vast majority would be cannabis, then cocaine, but significant issues again around prescription drugs and illicit prescription drugs. But just to give you that reassurance, we are linked in both east-west in terms of serious and organised crime boards nationally. And with Graham and his folk as well, but also north-south through the Joint Agency Task Force in respect of that wider distribution, supply and transnational work as well, that clearly we get great benefit from those relationships in terms of addressing the market here locally.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, a brief supplementary. In terms of the actors in this field, are they still local organised crime groups, or are you seeing international actors coming?
So yeah, sorry, you did ask that and I didn't answer. So we haven't seen evidence yet of the Mexican cartels, there's two particular cartels, really trying to push this in the UK, but neither is it entirely local. I mean, you require precursors. These precursors typically come from China, sometimes India. You need contacts, you need a network. And there is a mixture of some organisation in there and some, I mean, we do see, partly because you can get it in such small quantities, fentanyl coming in fast parcels, just posted from China, for example, into the UK, and that's why we work really hard to try and pick that up. But no particular sense of the Mexican cartels trying to push it, but a mixture of kind of low-key, small, and organised.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter had a question on this, and then I'll move to Mark after that.
Well, just an update, if you could. 6 or 8 months ago, we were informed that funding had been found to do a pilot wastewater measurement, which would look at drugs use, which might give a bit of a comparison from this place across the water and elsewhere in Europe, I suppose. Where is that?
So the England and Wales wastewater analysis was published in March or very late February. We've not seen yet, the wastewater analysis has taken place in Scotland and Northern Ireland, but I don't think either of them have been published yet. And that is, we don't do it, and neither do PSNI in terms of commission it. So I'm not entirely sure who is commissioning it in Northern Ireland. But Bobby or Dave, you may be able to speak to it. What we've seen from the England and Wales analysis, we've had to work really quite hard to make sure the wastewater analysis can pick up synthetic opioids, because they occur in such tiny traces that it's been a real kind of academic challenge to make sure the analysis can pick them up. But they have now managed, the researchers doing it have now managed to do it. It doesn't pick up cannabis, actually, for separate reasons. But we have seen a slight decrease in the use of heroin in the country. We've seen an increase, in England and Wales anyway, an increase in the use of cocaine. The really stark finding from the last set of wastewater analysis was over 100% increase in the use of ketamine, which is kind of not universally throughout England and Wales, but in certain parts of it has really taken off, and that is a real concern, because it's unlikely to kill you in the first instance, but it does incredible damage, particularly to bladders, and you have a lot of young people using it as a party drug without really understanding the quite quick and devastating effects it can have on their life. And we've not previously seen as much use of it, and so there's not been as much public health messaging around it, but it's a really important thing that we and governments and public health boards are kind of pushing now, is the fact there is more ketamine out there and the dangers of the use of it.
Thank you. Mark H., you had a question?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Graham. It's a very complex picture and a very scary one as well. This might be unfair to ask or to expect you to know off the top of your head, but in terms of those nitazene deaths, I know there's been 5 here, and one is one too many. But do we know were those deaths clustered either geographically or at a moment in time?
So I mean, I don't. Others might. We do though tend to see them cluster because normally, I mean, some people will take nitazenes on their own, knowing they are nitazenes. Very often they are mixed into heroin, even sometimes cocaine, but largely heroin, to kind of fortify them and give them a bigger hit. And so you will get a batch. And so we'll get clusters in certain parts of the country for a time that are really fortified, that people aren't quite expecting to be that strength, and then you see the deaths emerge. So clusters are definitely part of what we see. I'm not sure, I'm afraid, about the 5 in Northern Ireland.
No, I wouldn't be in a position just at the minute to give you detailed analysis around that, but certainly it's something we can look at and come back to you.
Away.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest we'll pick that up in the wastewater analysis question as well.
Thank you. Thank you. 2 more questions. One from Kate on CSA.
Thank you, Graham, for your report. In it, you reference an exponential rise in referrals relating to childhood sexual exploitation and abuse. And so I had 2 questions. One is a point of clarity. Please excuse my ignorance. You 47 persons of concern identified. What constitutes a person of concern? How does a child, for example, meet that threshold? And what safety precautions are then put in place once they have been identified? And the second question then is, given this exponential rise in referrals and the increased number of children at risk, why then are CSA disruptions in Northern Ireland going down? In fact, they've almost halved.
So taken reverse order, and Davey will help me with some of the safeguarding. So yeah, I probed into that because that was a surprise to me too. And actually, it's because we had a peak in the previous period that we were comparing it with, which was actually about protect measures in our nomenclature of how we do things. So we did a particular surge of kind of education work with our child exploitation and protection team, and so that had produced a very large number of disruptions, positive indicators we'd had against organised crime in the previous 6-month period, which hadn't occurred in this 6-month period. So that was the reason for it. When you look at, as I then went back to look, the CSA disruptions as a whole year compared one to the other, they were actually relatively stable. What we have seen nationally, though, is we did have a reduction in disruptions against online, the indecent images of children, as Davey referred to it. And that was because a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we had the start of this really significant increase in the referrals we were getting in from the US tech companies that we did not at that time have the resources and systems in place to deal with in the way we would want to, but it hadn't been forecast. And what we did at the time was we made sure we focused all our efforts on the initial triage of that information coming in. So where we could see an obvious indicator of an actual child who was being abused, we would spot that. And that meant it just took longer, the kind of a backlog built up. And so we were getting the most urgent ones out to policing, but there was a reduction in the total number that were going out. And that saw for a period of time a dip in the disruptions that we got from this kind of activity against child abuse. That has now returned, and Davey and I have both mentioned the stats, so they have gone up. We are putting basically now 800 disseminations out a week to UK forces, of which 20 or 25 will come to PSNI, which, by the way, we did look at the stats as well, is almost exactly in proportionate to the population here. It's as you would expect, and that's going to go up further. So I would expect. Well, what I wouldn't say is you cannot expect from a dissemination you will definitely get to a child safeguarded or an offender identified and convicted. It is some intelligence about that, and you cannot always turn that into an actual result, or it may turn out to be entirely innocent. They all need looking at. They won't all turn out to be an arrest and a conviction. But you would expect to see, and I'm sure we will see, the numbers of arrests and safeguards go up in the kind of months and years ahead. David, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And just again to provide that reassurance that our public protection branch have officers dedicated to reviewing child sexual exploitation, child criminal exploitation, as it is now evolving and is an area of concern as well. So they will draw together the information, be that in terms of missing person reports, be that partner information, etc. And just to be absolutely clear, where we suspect offending, we will address that as offending. These may well be people who are suspected of activity that may not necessarily meet that bar or that test in terms of actual offending behaviour. So rather than, if you like, wait until it gets to that point, this is about proactive action to intervene early and prevent that risk and minimise that risk to the vulnerable people, primarily the children that are potentially being exploited. So just to provide that reassurance, it's not a replacement for or a shortcut to investigative action where we feel that is absolutely required.
Okay, thank you. Final question from Les, and it's on 3D guns. And I know you were looking at illicit finance and fraud as well. We can cover that in the private session if that's okay.
I'll be very brief. Thanks, Director General. Yeah, your report flags up the increased risk of production of 3D printed firearms and that you've alerted the relevant authorities in Northern Ireland. I wonder if you could just say what are the specific risks in Northern Ireland, who are the people doing this or potentially might be doing it, and for what purpose?
Thanks, Les. So I also mentioned at the start that the firearms threat has not increased, actually, and that is a useful bit of context for this bit of the discussion. So we have, across the UK, been successful, and clearly there's a different dimension to this in Northern Ireland, in suppressing the firearms threat. It is harder than it used to be to get hold of what we call an original lethal purpose firearm, but a proper gun, and harder than in most countries around the world. And the number of people that are killed with firearms in the UK is internationally incredibly low. I think it was 25 people last year, which of course is 25 too many, but tiny compared to most other countries. But because we have made it really hard to get hold of an original lethal purpose firearm, people are turning to alternatives. And one potential alternative is 3D printed firearms, and they absolutely exist. And there are some kind of models that have been designed by gun lovers, particularly in the US, and blueprints are available kind of online. So we've been aware of that risk. I mean, part of our job is to look ahead and see what risks, as we've talked about in terms of synthetic opioids, has definitely been one, which is real, happening now, although we think we've managed to stabilise it so far. Another risk that we were looking at was 3D printed firearms. So we have seen them being printed for criminal use, and we have arrested criminals with 3D printed firearms, not in Northern Ireland, but in the rest of the UK. But we haven't actually been able to associate a discharge of a firearm with a 3D printed weapon yet anywhere in the UK, and we definitely haven't seen anyone injured or killed yet with a 3D printed firearm. So there's an important point of kind of context and reassurance for the public that there is potential in this, but so far it is not manifested. And the work that we've done to try and dampen it, and you referred to the alert that we put out, including to universities, has had part of an effect. There's also legislation going through Parliament at the moment that will kind of strengthen our ability to seize firearms when they're kind of partially built, 3D printed firearms, and also criminalise the possession of blueprints of 3D printed firearms.
Thank you. That's welcome reassurance. Thanks.
Thank you. And that concludes the questions in this session. I have one item that I want to go back to, Bobby, in relation to Operation Myologic, if you want to take on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's a product of the fact that this is an independent investigation. I need to get my language right here as well. So as I understand it, a report is to be sent to the Public Prosecution Service, not that it has been. Okay. If I gave that impression earlier, I need to just clarify that point.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And Deputy Chief Constable, Director General, thanks to you and all of your colleagues for taking questions and for all of their ongoing work on behalf of the community here. The session has gone on longer, and I felt it important to keep it going because of the important issues that we were talking about, specifically about criminality and the very difficult issue of drugs that destroys communities and families all across the UK. So thank you for all of your responses on that. That's the end of our public meeting. The next meeting will be on Thursday, the 3rd of July. And thank you everybody for watching. Can I also, just before we go, welcome ACC McNally. I know you were away representing the service at a funeral, and we'll catch up in the private session later on. Thank you everybody, and see you